For many, this is the choice in 21st century England between bad gods and godlessness. Let us reject this landscape and its stupid and demeaning choices. Let us echo the assertiveness of our predecessors who were not afraid to be religious in a new way. They knew that human beings need a place to worship in community, but their great gift to us is the idea that this can happen outside of a doctrine. In fact, more than that our souls flourish when our minds are free. Opening words from Jeff Jones. And now let our chalice be lit as a symbol for our free religious faith. So, welcome everyone to our service this morning. My name is Brian and I'm a member of this church. I'm glad that you've chosen to spend your time with us today, and also just to welcome those of us who are joining us online. I know you could be listening to the Archers Omnibus instead, so we really appreciate you making the effort. So if this is your first Brighton Unitarian service, the attitude you'll find here, as you may have seen on the signage outside, is that we welcome all who seek spiritual meaning in life, and all who believe religion is wider than any one faith. So when you hear the word God during the service, I'd invite you to interpret that in whatever way feels comfortable to you. So it could be divine presence, the ground of being, love, nature, mystery, or simply the name we give to what lies beyond our understanding. So the theme of today's service is Our Living History, in which we'll be exploring how the history of this church and the many different people who played their part in sustaining the congregation have helped shape not just our past, but the living spirit of this community today. So the opening hymn today is one that is much beloved by Unitarian communities around the world, and it's 148 in the Purple Book, Spirit of Life. So, Brighton Unitarian Church has always been more than just a building. It's been a home for spiritual nonconformists, a haven for dreamers and doubters, a gathering place for those who don't quite fit elsewhere. Or, let's be honest, they maybe don't want to. I expect that more few of us relate to Groucho Marx's famous quip, "I don't want to belong to any club that would accept me as one of its members." So for over 2 centuries, what's kept this place going hasn't been rigid beliefs or wealthy backers, but something much quieter and more persistent, a kind of gentle defiance, a sense that there's another way to do faith and another way to belong. So our story begins, as many good ones do, on the fringes. In 1793, 19 people were cast out of their Calvinist Baptist chapel for embracing a theology of universal love. They believed that no soul was beyond redemption, a belief that was radical enough to get them excommunicated and shunned as heretics and heathens. Among these religious rebels was William Stevens, who kept the flame alive by hosting services in his own home. It was a tiny, fragile community, often on the brink. But something deeper was happening. A seed was being planted. It wasn't about numbers or certainty. It was about creating space for a different kind of spirit, one that somehow has never left. That spirit followed them into a small chapel on Jew Street, which is just around the corner from here, and grew again in 1820 when they did something rather impressive. They secured land for a permanent building, and it wasn't just any old patch. They bought it from the Prince Regent himself, just before he became head of the Church of England. So doing business with these heretics and heathens didn't seem to bother him that much. You know, maybe he respected their conviction, maybe he just needed some more dosh to throw a few flash parties for his posh pals. But either way, the deal was done and the church was built. And as you all know, it was no ordinary church. It was designed by Eamon Wilds, the visionary architect who gave Brighton much of its distinctive Regency charm. From the elegant terraces to the sweeping crescents, his work helped shape the town we know and love today. And here, in our own building, he brought that same bold, graceful style, a chapel in the form of a classical Greek temple. So the inaugural service, it had a very decent turnout, around 350 people, which for a chapel this size must have felt pretty rammed. And I was thinking it might have been like a more sedate Regency version of the Rag and Bone Man gig here a few years ago. You can imagine a sense of energy, that something was taking root, not just a congregation finding its home, but a community daring to do religion differently, right in the heart of town. So what followed wasn't exactly plain sailing. Ministers came and went, congregations grew, then shrank, then grew again. The church changed names quite a few times too. Unitarian, Free Christian, Christ Church, as people kept asking the big questions. How should we worship? What are our religious values? Who is this church really for? And yet through it all, something held steady. A sense that this kind of open, thoughtful, questioning place of worship still had something important to offer. Throughout the church's history, people have brought not just faith, but bold vision and hard graft. In the 1820s, the Reverend Dr. John Morell, who was instrumental in ensuring this church was designed along classical lines, managed to combine his ministry with running a progressive school that banned corporal punishment and offered a pretty forward-thinking education for its time. The pupils didn't have to be Unitarian, but they were obliged to attend services here every Sunday, weaving education and spiritual development together. So I was interested to find out that among these young people were none other than Isambard Kingdom Brunel, the legendary civil engineer, and C.P. Scott, long-term editor and eventual owner of The Guardian, who famously said, "Comment is free, but facts are sacred." Another was Henry Solly, a Unitarian minister turned reformer, whose influence helped shape the course of British social policy. He championed causes such as universal suffrage, free education, the abolition of slavery, and cooperative movements, and he was a driving force behind the founding of working men's clubs. Together, these luminaries are a striking reminder that the spirit nurtured in this church can often reach far beyond its walls. Moving on to the late 1800s, another member of the congregation who deserves name-checking was Jessie McCotta. Although Jessie came from a well-known Jewish family in London, she'd embraced Unitarianism and was the driving force behind the fundraising to build a church hall as a rear extension to the main chapel, starting with a generous donation of her own. A bustling bazaar at the Royal Pavilion and further support from the congregation brought the total to £600, which I worked out is roughly £100,000 in today's money. And that was enough to build and furnish the hall out the back that we all still benefit from today. So thanks, Jessie. And as if that wasn't commitment enough, she later married the minister. Now that's commitment for you. So moving into the 20th century, by the 1920s, sadly, it seems the church had fallen into a rather forlorn state, hidden behind rusting iron railings and a thick tangle of overgrown shrubs. It must have looked more like a forgotten relic than a place of welcome. So, in 1927, a decision was made to remove the imposing railings and cut away the shrubbery, revealing the grand portico once again and reconnecting the church with the life of New Road, no longer shut off from the flow of people and the energy of the city. A local newspaper described the change as a transformation from a tomb to a temple. And I think this seems really symbolic. How often in our spiritual lives are we called to strip back what no longer serves, to rediscover what has quietly been beautiful all along. And this is a community that's frequently responded to its moment. In times of war, it served. In times of hardship, it gave. In the 1930s, when depression gripped the country, the congregation raised money for refugees from the Spanish Civil War and families in South Wales mining communities. Then, in the 1950s and 60s, the church was a lively hub, hosting theatre productions, literary talks, and lively debates. And there's one that sort of caught my attention, that in the early 50s, when the church welcomed Christmas Humphreys. Now, he was a guy who was considered to be the most eminent of all the British Buddhists of the 20th century, so he was kind of a big deal. And at a time when interfaith dialogue was far from mainstream, his visit must have felt very bold and daring, which I think says a lot about the spirit of this place: curious, open-minded, and never afraid to welcome a new perspective. In more recent years, the Reverend Jane Barton guided the church through two major and desperately needed renovations, raising an amazing £120,000 with the help of volunteers to save the building for future generations. But Jane's real renovation work was spiritual. She trained and mentored lay preachers from within the congregation and led services that were warm, inspiring, and inclusive, embracing world religions, mysticism, and pagan wisdom. With her husband, the Reverend Peter Roberts, the founder of the Unitarian Earth Spirit Network, she helped weave the rhythms of nature into the church. Peter's solstice and equinox services, which continue to this day, brought us into sacred connection with the changing of the seasons. Then, in 2010, a new era began, one that carried the legacy of the past forward with warmth, wit, and quiet dedication. Jeff Jones stepped into the role of lay leader and helped guide this church through more major repairs, renewal, and the joys and trials of community life, including our 200th anniversary and the collective trauma of the pandemic. Later, I'll return to Jeff's story and share some of the wisdom and insight he left with us. But let us come now to a time of prayer and shared stillness, which we brought to an end by some gentle piano music from Kathy. So I invite you to settle into your body, to feel the ground beneath you, and to come home to your breath. In this time of quiet, we return to the heart of this gathering, the sacred thread that connects us across time. We honour those who walk this path before us, whose courage, vision, quiet persistence helped shape a space where minds could be free and hearts open. We give thanks for those who are part of this community now, who give freely of their time, energy, and gifts to keep this church alive, helping it remain a beacon of gentle defiance and belonging. And we keep in mind those who are yet to come, the ones who will one day find meaning, community, and inspiration here, just as we do today. In the silence, may we feel the richness of these connections, past, present, and still unfolding. May we know in this shared stillness that we are part of something greater than ourselves. Let us be still together. So as we return from this stillness, we're now just going to take some time to receive donations that support the life and the upkeep of this church. So the accompanying music that will make you feel really generous. Well, that was very thorough. I'm very thank you so much. Your donations are so important to keeping this sacred space alive. So, when I first started researching this service online, and firstly it has to be said, the timeline that's been put together by Francis, Clark Lowes and Christine has been invaluable, and also they've written some very interesting booklets on the history of the plaques and the history of the ministers in the church, and they're actually available today. So if you're a history buff, that's the place to go. They're here. But also when I was researching, I spotted that in 2018, local historian Geoffrey Mead had delivered a talk in this very building called The History of Brighton Unitarian Church and the Cultural District of Brighton. And I thought, well, I think I'll reach out to Geoffrey, it might be a good idea. And he was very kind enough to meet up with me and loan me some of the material he had gathered. And we actually got chatting in Cafe Italiano next door. And I was just curious to know why Brighton has always felt like a place that welcomes religious nonconformity. Why hasn't the Church of England the same kind of hold here that it does elsewhere? And what is it about this town, the geography, its people, its history, that's helped shape the identity of openness, independence and quiet rebellion? So Geoffrey's knowledge of this area runs very deep, as any of you who have heard Geoffrey talk will know. And he was very kind enough to offer to be with us here this morning and to share a few insights into exactly that, and to help us place the story of this church within the wider story of Brighton itself. So, thank you, Geoffrey.
I was introduced as a historian. I'm really a geography lecturer, but Mrs. Mead checks me and I'm not wearing corduroy trousers. Brian was very keen that I set this church and the Unitarian movement in its general principle with Brighton, and why it would be in Brighton, because the one thing about Brighton is we are a different community. We accept difference in all types. Student. We accept difference in all manners, and a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are a very different community here in the centre of Brighton, the old heart of the town, in the old town, to the very nearby suburban areas. I live out in deepest suburbia. I live in Patcham. And Patcham is a very different community because they operate with a different heartbeat. Brighton's never been a great place for big landowners. Yes, we've got the King of England living a few hundred yards away, but he didn't own much land. He wasn't here very often. Brighton works on the basis that we've got very steep hills, very thin soil, and on top some of the hills some thickish clay. We've got damp valley bottoms. We've still got The Wellesbourne stream flows through from north of Patcham, creates the great big London Road Valley. It's not a landscape ideal for agriculture, so it wasn't acquired by the big landlords. They concentrate further out on the downland and on the rich areas westward into Hove. We were a maritime community. You know, we were one of the two biggest fishing towns on the south coast. Brighton controlled the channel from the Isle of Wight up into the North Sea. Bridport in Dorset from the Isle of Wight down to Cornwall. So we worked at sea. We traded onto the continent and to other parts of Northern Europe. Although we got a lot of timber in Sussex, you're only going to go north of the Downs, go on the South Downs way. There's a lot of timber out there. Very difficult to get it into Brighton. Much easier to bring it across from Europe. And so we had big trade, not just with Northern Europe, but with the far Baltic, you know, places like Latvia, Estonia, Russia, bringing in timber. We also caught a lot of fish, no refrigeration, it all had to be dried, smoked. Then we had a trade with the Mediterranean, where we took dried smoked fish down for Catholic feast days in the Mediterranean. So Brighton seafront, Brighton beach, would have fishermen and sailors coming from the Baltic nations, from Western Europe, from the Mediterranean. We're not very good with building materials in Brighton. We've just got flint and we've got some bricks which were made out where Embassy Court is now on the seafront. So we imported a lot of stone, particularly roofing materials like slate. That's coming down from North Wales, from Northern Ireland, stone coming up from the west of England. So you would be in Brighton and you would encounter Latvians, Estonians, Russians, Sicilians, Spaniards. We also had big timber trade from across the Atlantic. So we had timber coming in from the St. Lawrence Seaway, so French Canadians. We brought Alabama pine in, so you would have Native Americans, doubtless American black population on the ships. So Brighton always had people who spoke foreign, looked foreign, were foreign, ate foreign, drank foreign, had foreign customs, but we accepted them all because there was no one in Brighton to say, you can't do that. Okay? Now, most communities we have in the South of England in particular, you have a landowner and a church and a village, and they're, as a unit, what we term a close community. That's because the big landowners, you're all sitting down, you might die of shock, acquire the best land. Yeah? But Brighton didn't have best land, so we had about 30 different landowners in Brighton, all owned in penny packets. And because we were a maritime nation and we looked southward, we really neglected our agriculture. So when Brighton eventually bursts out of its old town towards the end of the 1700s, we don't spill out onto the big rectangular fields which were out in Ovingdean and Rottingdean and Patcham and Hangleton. We came on the old medieval strip fields, which we'd never bothered to update. So Brighton developed in penny packets because there was about 30 different landowners. If you wanted to do a big building project in Brighton, well, basically you couldn't. You just went over the border into Hove, because 4 people owned 90% of Hove. So you could buy big blocks of land, and you could develop Brunswick Town, the avenues, Palmyra, Cliftonville. You couldn't do that in Brighton unless you got way out to the east to Kemp Town, where Thomas Reed Kemp, Lord of the Manor and major landowner there, had a big block of land. So Kemp Town was developed there. But Brighton develops in a very piecemeal way. So we didn't have the influence of major landowners, and that allows a variety of non-conformity. And I always say that Brighton is a town full of non-conformists with capital N's, but also with small n's. You know, you don't need to know a lot about Brighton. If you do a little bit of history, only place in Sussex to have a Labour MP in 1964. The only place in the whole of the United Kingdom to have a Green MP. You know? 2 universities, a major gay population. Yeah? It's always been a place, kind of radical place, because there's no one to say, oh, you can't do that. You know, we didn't have that overbearing influence. If you are a visitor to another community, anywhere in Britain really, and you go into the centre of a town, generally the oldest buildings are in the centre. The oldest building almost invariably will be a church, an abbey, a chapel, a meeting house, some description. Doesn't work for Brighton. You're a visitor to Brighton, think I'll go and find the Church of England church. You wander around the centre of Brighton for a long, long time. Other than the Chapel Royal, just down the road, which was very late coming to Brighton, There are no Church of England churches. You've got to go way on the hill behind Marks and Spencer's to find St Nicholas. You know, it's out of town. Now, why is that? Well, the early Christian church may have been in the centre of Brighton, but we've only got half of Old Brighton. Coastal erosion means we haven't got a lower town. And Romano-British times, the church may have been there and lost to coastal erosion. It may have been that Saxon raiders, great valuable things were in the church, would have raided it if it was on the shore, so built it at the back of the town. The most plausible explanation, someone sent me a very nice print, amazingly, if you've read on local history, dated 3rd of March 1815, which shows you St Nicholas Church in a landscape full of burial mounds and tumuli. So St Nicholas may always have been the pre-Christian burial and worshipping site to worship your ancestors. And when the Christian church comes in, they put the church in the religious spot in Brighton, which is actually on the hill behind Marks and Spencer's and not in the centre of Brighton. So if you go around the centre of Brighton, what have you got? Well, just around the next corner, which is now, I see is now a Thai restaurant, was the first Quaker meeting house. It then moves in the 1805 to its present place in Ship Street. So two Quaker meeting houses. Brian mentioned Jew Street just round the corner here, which was where the first synagogue was located, 1792. It then moved down further into the town into West Street. So there were sites of two synagogues in early Brighton, two Quaker meeting houses, and you could shake your stick at the number of Methodists, strict Methodists, even stricter Methodists, Baptists, Countess of Huntingdon's connection, the Swedenborgian connection, as well as Unitarians coming towards the end of the 18th century. So it has always been a place where you would really have to hunt for the Church of England. The non-conformity really is what Brighton is about. And that comes through in its history up through to the present day. And so we've got a very vibrant community here, major art scene, Brighton Festival, the second biggest arts festival in the country outside of Edinburgh. We've got the Brighton Fringe, which I'm a part of. Do keep looking out for the brochure for Brighton Fringe, which will be out for tours in the summer. So Brighton is a non-conforming town, and it has been from the very earliest days, and the principle being that we don't work with the sun, we work with the moon. If you are a farmer in Patcham or West Blatchington, when the sun comes out, you go into the field, you follow an oxen backside around all day, and you go back to bed when the sun comes down. In Brighton, we don't work with the sun, we work with tidal time. We work with the moon. So if it's low tide and it's February at 3 o'clock in the morning and there's a thin snow, you've got to be on the beach unloading boats, because when the tide comes in, everything washes away. So we've always operated 24 hours a day in Brighton, as opposed to the suburbs who operate with the sun. So we've always been a very, very different community, down, of course, to its geography. Thank you very much.
Wisers, that was fantastic. So thank you so much for that, Jeffrey. It's just been a really rich contribution today. So our next hymn today is 226 in the Green Book, Song of Peace. Yeah, so sorry about the omitted hymn. That was my bad. I was distracted. And it was one of my favourites, Let Love Continue Long, so oops. But maybe it'll help me keep within time, which hasn't always been the case, as some of you might know. So, for a number of us here today, when we think of the spirit of this place and what kept drawing us back, the influence of the late Jeff Jones, our lay leader from 2010 to 2021, is deeply felt. His presence, wisdom, and way of being helped shape this community in lasting ways. But that spirit hasn't stood still. Under Jennifer's ministry, it's finding new expression by opening our doors and growing community in ways that speak to where we are now. But to give you a sense of the kind of person Jeff was, this was someone who could lead a service on the spiritual significance of fossils, offer a quietly profound weekly course on prayer as a practice of presence and deep listening, and still declare his wish to be chauffeured around Brighton in a pink convertible wearing a blonde wig. Jeff loved David Bowie, Black Forest Gatto, Patti Smith, strong coffee, pies. He really loved pies. The Simpsons, contemporary dance, and Sunday roasts. And he had a deep love for the northeast, the coastline, the steelworks, and the glowing Teesside lights that always meant home. He wrote raw, gritty, fearless poetry and wasn't afraid to be moved or to move others. He showed up for people in quiet ways, a blessing in a care home, or a few well-chosen words in time of crisis or struggle. He led this church with kindness, curiosity, and a profound belief in the sacredness of our ordinary, messy, everyday lives. As well as the legacy Jeff left behind that we're so grateful to have inherited, he was very conscious of what he had inherited from this church's founders, saying in a service back in February 2018, they were open-minded, but not so open-minded that their brains fell out. They believed in thinking. This is one of the most distinctive features of those early Unitarians. They believed it was possible to have a religious life without subscribing to superstition. And today too, we strive to be a thoughtful, reasoning, questioning church, a mindful church. Our relationship with the divine, with God, cannot be made out of thought alone. One of the reasons I joined this church was its commitment to thinking, to exploring, to discussing. But thinking about God can lead us into the trap of believing that God can be understood. Perhaps that God is tidy, comprehensible, grammatical. In some ways, God might be very well mathematical, but it is the mathematics of music, galaxies, enzymes, oceans, evolution. Is a mathematics thrillingly beyond the comprehension of a single human mind in its intricacy and implications. Whatever you think you know about God is precious, but it's also partial. In another service entitled Beauty and Community, we got a taste of Jeff at his wisest and wittiest when he said, "We flourish when we are free, but most of us need more than freedom. In order to grow and live together, most of us need a framework of values and agreements which hold each other in balance. Personally, being right is one of my favourite hobbies. And sometimes, I know how much this will shock you, I'm not. And even sometimes when perhaps I am, it really doesn't matter. And there are more important things, such as listening and beauty and community." And in a service reflecting on this church's founding legacy, he posed these questions. Can we look to the future with gladness and faith? Can we come together, acknowledge and hold our differences for the sake of shared endeavour? What are we prepared to sacrifice? How will we be witnesses to our truth? Jeff didn't just ask questions like these, he helped others find a way into answering them. For me personally, his influence was personal and lasting. At first, he invited me to read some of the poems, prose, or reflections he had selected for services, then gently encouraged me to start writing my own contributions. Before long, he was asking me to lead service lead services just as I'm doing today. Something I first started doing around 8 years ago. And there's no doubt I would never have taken that step on my own. I had just no intention in that department at all. And I wouldn't have explored that part of myself without his gentle encouragement. So it's thanks to him that I found a way to contribute more fully to this community. Jeff also saw creativity and spirituality as intrinsically linked, once saying, "There's something beautiful for me about the very act of writing. Often when I'm feeling blocked, when I'm struggling to find inspiration, I get out my old fountain pen, fill it with ink, and just write whatever I feel like writing. For me, this returns a sense of pleasure to the act of writing. Just enjoying writing for its own sake frees me from trying too hard and being too focused on the outcome." And he invited us not just to be creative, but to trust our inner wisdom, to lean into life's mystery, saying, when we trust our spirit, we open ourselves to connection with our dreams, our capacity for wonder, our instinct to explore, our aliveness to beauty and colour. But more than that, our souls connect us to the wildness of God. By wildness, I don't mean cruel or chaotic. I mean something like the nature of God, the unconditional heart of God, irrationally generous, awesome, and joyful. The wildness of God is a challenge to be here, a challenge to bring a certain recklessness to love and to being alive. So our final hymn today is one that is a bit of a favourite with this community, and I know that Jeff really loved it too, and it's number 102 in the Purple Books, "May the Road Rise with You," and it's our custom to sing the words 3 times. So to end today's service, Let us come together again in prayer. Spirit of life, we give thanks for the spirit that binds us, stretching across centuries, carried by rebels and reformers, teachers and poets, builders, fundraisers and volunteers, believers and skeptics alike. May we be worthy heirs of this open faith, grounded in reason but alive to mystery. May we remember that our search for meaning is sacred, not despite its uncertainty, but because of it. May we trust the wisdom within us, the generous, joyful, divine presence that stirs us to love, to create, and to embrace the fullness of our humanity. And may we leave this place with a little more courage, a little more compassion, and a deeper sense of what it means to belong to one another, to life, and to something greater than ourselves.
Non-conformist. Who was it? Gershwin. Thanks, Kathy, and thank you, Brian. There was a lot of work went into that, and I think that was really rich and great. Thank you. Thank you also to Jeffrey Mead. That was really fascinating and great. There's so much history, and there's so much more we can learn about this place. There's loads of material, so if you want to find out more, the very person is sitting on the second row here. Frances is very knowledgeable about our history. Thank you, Stuart, for setting up, and Helen's just gone to make some tea and coffee, which I'd invite you to stay for. Next Sunday, the service will be led by our minister, Jennifer Sanders. And from 12:30 to 3:30 this afternoon, there'll be a congregational meeting to discuss how we can balance our resources with what we're being called to do. So basically, the way forward. So please stay for this meeting if you're able. On Wednesday, the church will be open from 12:30 till 2 for some gentle piano music, followed by quiet reflection led by Jennifer. And on Wednesday, our meeting of Heart and Soul will be online. It's a quiet and contemplative hour from 7:30 on Zoom, and it will be led by Susie. So if you can join us, do, and if you're not on the mailing list for that, do ask me or Jen. On Friday, the lunchtime concert is from 12:30 to 1:15, with refreshments being served in the hall from 12 o'clock. And performing will be harpist Magdalena Rising. She is an amazing harp player. If you can come, please do. She's playing with a guitarist, Shane Hill, playing folk, jazz and some original work. Not much more. If you're interested in coming to the quiz curry night here on the 22nd of November, we're not dishing out tickets, but we're taking bookings. It'll be good fun, and there'll be a cheap bar and a raffle. It'll be great. So I'll be hanging around over there if you want to book. And there's greeting cards on sale also over there, and a card reader if you didn't have cash and you'd like to donate money to the church. And there's also a collection box for Sussex Night Stop, a charity which supports homeless young people, the red box there. And that's it from me.